be seated. We are continuing our series in 1 Peter. And Peter is in Rome. Nero is in charge. Very likely, Peter historically loses his life at the hands of Nero. He is writing to Christians kind of outside of the area, and he is trying to encourage their hearts because many of them are afraid that they're going to die because they call themselves Christian. So Peter writes these two books, 1st and 2nd Peter, and he tries to lay out some groundwork for these people so they have a strong faith, because ultimately their faith may cost them their life. And so as Peter does this, he's laid out a whole bunch of things. We've been through the first two chapters. He's talked about the idea that they were a chosen people. He's talked about the idea that they are people that have an incredible inheritance. So they don't need to fear the future. They have a future to look forward to. He talks to them about the idea that their salvation is a big deal, that they need to really understand the importance and implications of their salvation, their faith and trust in Jesus Christ. He goes on to tell them that the world's not going to understand that. The world is going to really it's going to be a stumbling block because they think you ought to live life a different way. So he explained to them that they're really watching you and you need to be careful how you act. And so he deals a lot in this passage, a lot of this book, with the idea of submission. That they need to see a different way of life for you as a Christian. So he addresses specifically people who in the church are really struggling. People, for instance, the government, who's telling them one thing, and their faith is being persecuted. They're persecuted for their faith because of the government. Peter says, look, you need to be submissive to your government. You had slaves who were being persecuted by their masters because they were Christians. And Peter says, look, you just need to be submissive. You need to live a life in such a way that they want what you have. And so last week we talked about the same thing with wives. It was a culture in which supposedly you were supposed to have the religion of your husband. And so when you put your faith and trust in Christ, you need to understand culturally that was a big deal. So you need to live in such a way that he and his friends wives want what you have. And he talks about those things to wives. Now, he spends 6 verses talking to wives, and then he spends 1 verse talking to husbands. And it's kind of odd because normally what Peter has done in this passage is he's picked people who have a lesser social economic kind of world. The slaves, wives, people to the government. Now all of a sudden he addresses husbands. Now, he only spends 1 verse on husbands. He spends 6 for the wives. Okay? I think he knew that guys could only handle one thing at best. So that's why he gives them one thing to work on. And we're actually going to talk about that in a second. So I'm going to throw the verse up. We're going to look at it. We're going to dissect it. We're going to understand it. And then we're going to apply it. All right? So here we go. And I put it up in 2 versions because I like the contrast between the two. The one that we normally read is the NIV. Husbands, in the same way, be considerate as you live with your wives. Treat them with respect as the weaker partner, as heirs with you of the gracious gift of life, so that nothing will hinder your prayers. The New Living Translation says it this way: in the same way, you husbands must give honor to your wives. Treat her with understanding as you live together. She may be weaker than you, but she is your equal partner in God's gift of new life. If you don't treat her as you should, your prayers will not be heard. So I like the contrast between the two of them. Let's understand, just like we did when we talked about the women, let's understand a couple of things. First of all, he's talking to Christian men, and he's talking to Christian men who are married. So this is what he's saying. He's saying, all right, if you're a Christian here this morning, you put your faith and trust in Jesus Christ, and you're married, listen up. Because this is specifically for you. The rest of us are going to learn something, but this is specifically for you. He starts with the idea, he says, in the same way, and that's a reference to chapter 2 when he talks about Jesus Christ and all of the things that Christ did and his submission and his love and his obedience and all those things. He said, in the same way, guys, in the same way, be considerate. We'll talk about that in a second. As you live with your wives, the idea of live is this. What he's talking about, it's interesting. This word is in what we call, in the original language, is what we call a present imperative. And here's what it means. Guys, this is something that you need to do now, and you need to keep doing it until you die. In other words, it's a command. So in other words, what he says is, guys, this is not optional. You don't have an option here. You have to do this. You're a Christian husband this morning. Here's what you have to do, and you have to do it every day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 52 weeks out of a year, until you take your last breath. That's what he's saying. All right? That's how you have to respond. Okay? And then he starts with this idea of live with, and that's the idea of simply you're in a relationship together, so this is what you need to do. Now, I ran across a fascinating deal, a fascinating company, okay, with some incredible statistics for marriage, all right? So I want to throw this out there because I think this is important for us to understand when we talk about this issue of marriage. It's from it's called the Gottman Institute. Julie and John Gottman did research in 2021 is when this thing was published. Their whole organization is focused on one thing, collecting data from happy, I don't even want to say married couples because it's not married couples, so we're living together. But the idea is, what is unique and what are the statistics with happy and unhappy couples? So all they did was gather data, and then they compiled all this data. And they said, based on everything that we've seen, here are trends that we have noticed that are distinct between couples that are happy and couples that are not happy. Okay? And here's what they came up with. These are their conclusions. Happy couples spend at least 6 hours a week together. You go, well, that's easy. You know, I mean, we sleep 8 hours, so we're done. No. When we talk about couples, we're talking about interaction with each other, all right? And happy couples do it for 6 hours every week at least. Then they broke it down. And they broke it down farther to find there were trends. There were things that seemed patterns that they developed within those 6 hours. And here's what they found. One of the key things for a couple, for a happy couple, is when they leave and when they get back together in a given day. And here's what they found. Happy couples spend on average 2 minutes, at least 2 minutes before they leave each day together. Before they depart for the day and go about their own. When they end the day, they spend 20 minutes together when they get back together. They found that happy couples, but at the beginning of the day, before they leave, they spend 2 minutes, at least 2 minutes together. And at the end of the day, when they come home and they see each other, and they call this parting and departing. But when they get back together, they found they spend 20 minutes together, on average. They found that there was a bonus time to this. And the bonus time was that with some couples, they spend at least 6 seconds during that time hugging or kissing. That was a bonus. Now, I read this week, and I'm studying for the message and everything else. I looked at my wife last night, or 2 nights ago, and she came in, kissed me goodnight, I was in the office, whatever else, and I said, hey, honey, just a second. I said, I'm reading this study, and it says we need to kiss for 6 seconds today. So she said, I'm game. So we kissed for 6 seconds. We got done, and I said, I don't know about this. I said, I thought I was going to have to come up for air. So, I mean, whatever. But they figured 6 seconds on average, all right, Hugging and kissing a day, okay? Then here's what they found. They found that there was a time with happy couples of what they called admiration and appreciation. Happy couples spent 5 minutes every day in admiration and appreciation. What it meant was you did not simply say, hey, honey, thanks for dinner. It went beyond that. It went beyond the, hey, honey, I just want you to know I appreciate you taking the time to make sure that we have a good dinner every night. In other words, it went beyond just simply the little give and take kind of stuff. Then they found, on average, the couple averaged in a week 35 minutes of physical affection, whether it was holding hands, hugging, kissing, whatever. He said they found 35 minutes on the average with that. Then they found that out of that 6 hours, 2 hours of it was spent on a date. That date may have been shopping together, it may have been going out to lunch, it may have been but they spent 2 hours on average doing that. And then they spent an hour on average in what they called a State of the Union meeting, or we used to call it a family council thing. And here's what that is. So like this was, by the way, if you have teenagers, this is huge. This was revolutionary for our family if you have teenagers. Every Sunday night we would get together, all four of us, we would sit down at the table and we'd have what we call family council thing. That was when we went through the schedule for the coming week. We talked about who's going to be home what nights, who's going to do this, and then we had what issues do we have that we need to solve? Like in our house, it was parking. Who got to park in the garage? Who gets to park in the garage so they don't have to scrape snow off or ice off of the car in the morning? You know? So we're sitting at the table and we had to figure out how do we do that? You know, well, I went out to get my car and so-and-so was parked behind me and I couldn't get out and I had to go wake them up and get their keys. Okay, so we solved the problem. All the keys went beside the microwave, so anybody could move anybody's car whenever they needed to. We solved all of those problems. We learned how to communicate as a family do. They found that happy couples spend an hour on average, an hour every week doing that. My wife and I last night, we don't sit down at the table and go, okay, it is now time for family council. We don't do that. And I was sitting in my chair. I said, hey, what's your schedule look like for the week? We walked through my schedule and her schedule for the week. But happy couples do that. That's what they found. They found that these were kind of trends within, and again, this isn't a Christian survey. This is just this is what we found in looking at couples that are happy in their marriage and couples that are unhappy. Here's the thing. Here's the key takeaway for it more than anything else. Live with. It assumes a presence. You want to know what happens in a lot of our families today? We're not even present. And even when we are present, we aren't. We're sitting there with our phone. We're sitting there with our iPad. We're sitting there watching TV. We're not paying attention. We're not engaged in a conversation. We're not really living together. We're just together. And so Peter, when he writes this, he said, in the same way, be considerate as you live together. The New Living Translation says, give honor to them. The King James says it this way, dwell with them according to knowledge. Now, there's two ideas. Idea one is that just like when he talked to the women in the first part of chapter 3, he's saying, look, you live in fear of God, not necessarily your husband, but you live in fear of God. You do what God wants you to do, wives. In the same way, he's saying that to men. Men, you need to dwell with knowledge. You need to know what God says about how you treat your wife. That's one idea. Second idea is you need to know and understand your wife. Now listen, this is countercultural. Our culture, and you know the jokes. Well, you can't understand a woman, never know what she's thinking, I've tried, I just gave up, Okay, so listen up, guys. You know what God says? Your job is to understand her. You don't get an option. You need to know your wife. You need to know what makes her tick. You need to know what brings her joy. You need to know what pushes her button. You need to know what she likes, what she doesn't like. Now, guys, we are really bad at this. We are really bad at this. When I deal with premarital counseling, I'm getting ready to marry a couple, I go through this with the guys. And I look at them and I say, look, okay, I'm in the same boat you are. We're idiots when it comes to this. So here's what I have. I printed this out. I have sheets in the back for all the men in the church. Okay? You can take one of these sheets. Here's what it is. 50 questions to find out about your wife. 50 questions to be able to look through that sheet and be able to go, yep, I know what her favorite flower is. I know what her favorite restaurant is. Yeah, I know what she enjoys. I know how to do this. I know what. 50 questions. That's your homework for the next 10 years. Figure it out. Figure it out. This, when we were on family vacation, so I love my family to death, but there's some things they do that just, it's their thing, not mine. We always play games as a family when we're on family vacation. We always do a puzzle. You know, this year we added Legos too. But, so, who brought that game, by the way? Do you know your family?
I think Alex had it.
Okay, so one of them, so the kids bring, and so we're sitting there, we get in the cabin, it's relaxing, night, kids have gone to bed, and they bring out this game. Let's play a game. Oh, great. And they'll tell you, I am horrible when it comes to this. This is like my least favorite thing to do, but I do enjoy it, kind of. So, the game was, how well do you know your family? Okay, and it's like one of these Amazon top leading game things and So what happens is you pick a card, and the card asks a question, and you answer the question. Okay? So for instance, you pick a card that says, what is your least favorite vegetable? Now you don't tell anybody, you just know what your least favorite vegetable is. Then you go around the room until and everybody gets to answer what they think your least favorite vegetable is. If they get it right, first person gets it right gets a card. Whoever has the most cards at the end of the game wins. Pretty simple. Okay? But some of the questions, there's some questions I looked at and said, we ain't talking about that one. I put it back in the deck and I would, so, you know, Jimmy, I give Jimmy credit. I give JT like the most credit of all the, because he got a tough question. He got a card I would have put back. Okay? And the card was this. I'll never forget what the card was. The card was, what is it that I do that annoys people the most? Now, he has to answer this question, okay? But then 5 people get a guess. So when he's done, we have 6 things that annoy people that he does, and they're all different. And he listens to everybody go, well, you do this, and this really annoys a whole lot of people. You do this, and he's like, nope, that's not on my card. Nope, that's not on my card. Thank you for the information. That's not on my card. So this is for like, I mean, you know, top level, you really got to get close to your family kind of deal. But you know, here's what was great about it. We learned a lot about each other as a family. We did that with small group. We would ask a question. How much did you learn about people in your small group this year by some of the questions that we asked? Because that's how you build relationships. And so what he's saying here is you need to know that about your wife, guys. You need to be able to understand her. And then he gets into this thing about weaker vessel, all right? You know, weaker partner, this says, equal partner, weaker than you, you know, and so everybody gets all bent out of shape on this. All right, listen, let's just be real here. Men and women are different. This is not talking about mentally they are weaker. In fact, neuroscience, you know what neuroscience tells us? Neuroscience says you got 2 parts of your brain, right and left part of your brain, 2 right and left hemisphere. There's path that runs in between them. You know what neuroscience explains to us? Men, your path is really small. Women, your path is like a super highway. Seriously, that's how one guy described it. He said, the way a woman's brain is designed, she can have stuff going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, just every which way. Guys, we got a little foot trail. So listen to me, women, because you need to understand that. When you're sitting there and going, you know, what are you thinking about? Because your mind's going, boo, we got nothing on our trail. And when we look at you and say nothing, you know what's on the trail? Nothing. We weren't even thinking about something until you asked us what we were thinking about. It's insane. We are geared completely differently. It's not a better or worse. we know emotionally. You're like, oh, well, women cry at everything and da-da. No. You know what? That's an incredible strength because they have a vulnerability and an openness that most guys don't. That's not an inferior thing. In fact, I would probably argue it's a superior thing. So this isn't talking about weaker emotionally. It's not talking about weaker mentally. Literally, the idea here is that they are weaker physically, and we know physiologically. Bone structure is different, muscle structure. That's why this whole women, transgender, athletes kind of thing, and again, it's a broad brushed thing in the way that God designed it, okay? That women are weaker physically. Now again, look, we have women in this church. Okay, Katie, she's not here. I don't want to embarrass her, so I'll say it since she's not here. She won the triathlete deal in her age group against 40 some odd people last week in Omaha. I do not want to compete with that woman physically. Okay? So, but as a broad brush thing, in fact, it says here as a weaker vessel. It's a fascinating word. We get a word vase. We get a word vase from it. Literally, it's the idea. One translation puts this as it was the sacred vessels used in worship. He said, what he was saying is, the wife is the person who she's like this incredibly sacred, valuable vessel, guys, and you treat her that way. You treat her with honor. You treat her with dignity. You treat her with respect. He said, guys, that's what you're commanded to do. Those of you who are raising boys. You need to make sure that your guys, your kids, learn how to respect women. It is huge. My boys were raised, in fact, I don't think my boys ever heard me say, don't talk to your mother that way. You don't talk to my wife that way. In fact, no one talks to my wife that way. When my boys both my boys are in the military, both of them have had commanding officers that were women. Fortunately for them, they learned to respect women. So they didn't have a problem with it. In fact, to this day, one of the people that my JT fears the most is a woman who was his drill, I call them drill instructors, but in basic training. In fact, he didn't even want me to meet her. I was like, no, I want to meet this woman. I want to meet this one. To this day, he will tell you, he shudders when he hears her voice. She was awesome. She was absolutely, they have a great relationship, but she was absolutely awesome. But he says, as this incredibly valuable thing, it's an incredible word. And then just the idea of treating her with respect, because this is what he says. He says, your partner. You both have the same eternal destiny. You guys are heirs together. So you treat her, because again, I don't know if there was an issue in the church where guys were taking advantage of their wives or whatever else, but Peter writes this very, very explicitly. And then he says something that should scare the life out of you guys. He says that nothing will hinder your prayers. The New Living Translation says, God will not hear your prayers. That little word hinder is an interesting word. It means to dig a trench. It's used 11 times in the Bible. Basically, it was used in combat. When an opposing army was coming up against you, they would dig a trench to slow them down. I never forget when we were in PNG. So in the island where Aaron and Lori were, there's one road that goes the whole island. That's it. One road. Okay? It was worse than any gravel road you have in Woodbury County. One road. From one end of the island. Avalon, how long is that island? Like 15, 20 miles?
Something like that. It's only 10 miles wide.
Yeah, okay. So that's it. The whole island's 10 miles wide, one road, all the way down it. Okay? I don't remember exactly right, but two tribes got in an argument, and I think it was over a soccer game. It was, yeah. They got so mad, what they did is they dug a trench in the middle of the road. So you couldn't get from one side, their tribe, to the other tribe. In fact, you couldn't get anywhere on the island from one side to the other side. It stopped everything. That's what Peter said. He says, guys, if you don't do this, if you don't honor and respect and treat your wife right, the way God says, here's what you need to understand. You have just dug a trench between you and God, and he's not going to listen to you. In other words, you might as well stop praying because God's cut you off. Now, there are very few things in the Bible that are talked about at this level. If you do this, this is how God will automatically respond. And when Peter writes to men, here's what he says. Guys, you don't treat her right, you might as well stop praying because it's not going to do diddly. This is serious. This is serious. So let's talk about a couple of takeaways real quick. I got to wrap it up. First thing, I can't believe I have to say this, but we do. There are differences in gender. There are differences in gender. I don't care what you want to be called. I don't care what you think. I don't care what culture says. There are two genders, male and female. It's stamped in your DNA. When God created you, he designed you that way. All of creation speaks of male and female. There are two genders. We're in a society which blurs that. And we have to understand the danger of accepting and embracing that mindset. Because what happens is when you do that, you get farther away from the Creator and creative design. Look, we live in a culture in which this week at Fair, you're going to see a whole fair based on gender. You're not going to see a bull or a steer in the dairy barn. Why? Because creation wasn't designed that way. When these kids turn in their bucket calf thing, one of the questions they often get asked, is this a boy or a girl? Is this a male or a female? Why? Because it's stamped all over creation. And yet we're in a culture which wants to blur that. Don't let culture blur it. Those of you who are raising kids, you raise kids with an understanding that creation and the Creator created them uniquely as they are, and you help them learn to deal with that as a created being. We're in a culture which doesn't get that. We're in a culture where it's actually, and guys, listen, we're in a culture in which you almost feel guilty being a man. That's insane. That is insane. I am proud to be a man. My wife is proud to be a woman. We don't need to blur that. And we need to set that as an example for our kids. And guys, some of you really need to think, what does it mean to be a man in 2024? Do real men cry? Do real men show emotion? I mean, we have to define this for our kids. And we need to be clear about it. I think another thing is this, and this is general for all of us. If you're in a position of responsibility or authority, you need to be very careful how you treat the people you're responsible to. As a husband, you are responsible for your family, and you need to be very careful how you treat them. If you're an employer, you need to be very careful on how you treat your employee. If there's a relationship in which you have more responsibility over them, not that you're superior, but you have more responsibility, you need to be really, really careful. Guys, here's what you need to understand. When it comes to a marriage relationship, most guys are passive. That goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden. When Eve was tempted, Adam was standing right there and he kept his mouth shut. Because it said, she did eat and gave to him, and he did eat. He was standing right there. He kept his mouth shut. And I think it's one of the reasons God says, all right, I'm going to teach you, you don't have that option as a man. You're not going to be responsible for her, and you're going to take care of her, and you're going to honor her, and you're going to respect her, and you're going to put her on a pedestal, and you're going to treat her like you ought to treat her. And he says, you want to know who's responsible for their marriage relationship? The guys are. And guys, one of the greatest things that could be said of your wife is you have a happy wife because of the way you honor, respect, and treat her. You want a legacy? You make that your legacy. I ran across something this week that I thought summarized, because I have a lot of people who deal with the pain of divorce, how hard it is, what it does to a family, all the implications of it, and people don't understand it. It's like, this is an easy way out, and they don't understand. No. This has long-term complications till the day you die. And I have people saying, I just don't understand it. I don't know how it happened. I don't know how it happened. I think that this poem probably sums it up better than most that I've ever seen. Listen to it. Here's what it says. It's called The Wall. Don't know who the author is. Their wedding pictures mocked them from the table. These two, whose minds no longer touched each other. They lived with such a heavy barricade between them that neither a battering ram of words nor artilleries of touch could ever break it down. Somewhere between the oldest child's first tooth and the youngest daughter's graduation, they lost each other. Throughout the years, each slowly unraveled what that tangled ball of string called self. And they tugged at stubborn knots, each hid his searching from the other. Sometimes she cried at night and begged the whispering darkness to tell her who she was. He lay beside her, snoring like a hibernating bear, unaware of her winter. She took a course of modern art, trying to find herself in colors splashed on a canvas, then complaining to the other women about men who were insensitive. He climbed into a tomb called the office, wrapped his mind in a shroud of paper figures, and buried himself in customers. Slowly, the wall between them rose, cemented by the mortar of indifference. One day, reaching out to touch each other, they found a barrier they could not penetrate. And recoiling from the coldness of the stone, they each retreated from the stranger that was on the other side. For when love dies, it is not in a moment of angry battle, nor when fiery bodies lose their heat. It lies panting, exhausting, and expiring at the bottom of a wall it could not scale. I've watched this play out. It doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be that way. And guys, what I would encourage you to do is to partner with your wife, to understand, to know her, to value her, to honor her. And what I have learned, listen to her. I look back on our marriage and mistakes that I made as a husband, and every one of them I can pretty much trace to this. I should have listened to my wife. I should have listened to my wife. When God created Adam, he looked at him and said, there's something else he needs. And he created Eve. And literally, he said, she is a helpmeet. She is a helper, suitable, geared, designed, perfectly figured out to make you a better person. Adam, this is my gift to you. A wise husband honors, exalts, uplifts her, encourages her, knows her, respects her, honors her, and puts her on a pedestal. And God hears his prayers. And I want to challenge you, because when Peter addresses this, he does it in one verse. But what he packs in this verse is like a freight train. So, I end this morning with this. Peter challenges husbands to know and honor their wives. God commands us to treat them as valuable and vital in our spiritual growth. Failure to obey this command comes at a high price in the life of a Christian husband. God refuses to hear the prayers of a husband who will not honor his wife. Let's pray. Lord, help us. Tough to hear, but help us to make it a habit of our lives. Lord, may all of us learn to honor those around us. Lord, for those of us that are married, may we really take to heart this idea of giving our wives a place of honor and respect in our home. And may all who know us know the value and the place that they hold in our hearts. So use us in our lives and let us be the people you want us to be. These things we ask in your name. Amen.